Well, you probably said you wanted Pitt to land some guys out of the transfer portal. You were probably hoping they would get someone here. Well, how about not getting 1, 2, 3, I don't know, like 7? Pitt got 7 players out of the transfer portal. 7 transfers committed to Pitt over the weekend. I think they were all on visits, and all ended up picking Pitt, I should say, as their transfer destination. And all of a sudden, that list of incoming transfers has boomed from 3 all the way up to 10. It's a huge number. And now Pitt's list of incoming transfers looks a little more impressive, at least in terms of quantity. And I think in some cases, in a number of cases actually, in terms of quality as well, looks quite a bit better than it did, on Friday. It's gotten really big, and you're starting to see some of those pieces coming together to fill in the holes that this 2025 roster was going to have if they didn't land a bunch of transfers. So it's not Transfer Tuesday. Nor ordinarily we talk about this stuff on Transfer Tuesday, but because they just got all these transfer commitments on Saturday and yesterday, we're going to talk about them here today. And I know you might be thinking like, dude, Pitt basketball had a big win on Saturday. They beat Stanford by 15 points. They got a huge game tomorrow night. And you're right about both of those things. They both merit conversation, and we'll definitely spend a lot of time talking about them tomorrow. So I think it makes sense to with the Duke game tomorrow night. I think it makes sense to do all basketball tomorrow. And then with all these transfers that they got over the weekend, it makes sense to talk about transfers today. So we'll switch it up a little bit. Instead of Transfer Tuesday, we'll have Transfer Monday. We'll have Pitt Hoops Tuesday. And today we will talk about all these transfers that they landed over the weekend. So let's get into it. Who's coming to Pitt? How do they fit in? What did the Panthers land out of the transfer portal this weekend? We're breaking it down for you on the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's funny. I was going to say something like, yeah, welcome to Monday morning. It's a snowy one out there. But I'd be sort of like, sometimes when I say things like that, make a comment on the weather or something, as it may be. I mean, as we've said many times, I taped this the night before. So I don't actually know if this snowstorm is going to happen. It seems like it's going to. Our local school district is already on a 2-hour delay before a single snowflake has fallen, which is almost makes it inevitable that we're not going to get much accumulation. In which case, I hope you're enjoying the safe roads and lack of precipitation. If it does come down, we'll see how much comes down. I'd like that 2-hour delay to stay at a 2-hour delay and not turn into a full day cancellation. But either way, we'll see how that weather turns out. Hopefully you stay safe in however you endeavor to interact with the weather today. But it is the Monday edition of the Morning Pitt here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Had a busy weekend on Panther-Lair.com with all of the transfers visiting and all of the transfers committing. And then the Pitt basketball game. There's a lot of stuff to check out. If you missed any of it, head over to Panther-Lair.com. Not necessarily right now, maybe at the end of this video. So wait about 15 minutes and then head over to Panther-Lair.com to catch up on all the Pitt sports news. Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all of the Pitt sports coverage that you can possibly handle. Football, basketball, recruiting, transfers, wrestling, everything that's going on. We've got it all at Panther-Lair.com. That's the website below, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And then, of course, what we always ask you to do with this video, these YouTube videos that we do, the Morning Pitt every day of the week, our weekly live show every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Some post-game shows, which we will get into. At some point during the basketball season, we'll start having a few of those. It's all right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And so you know what we ask you to do. Like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And that way you won't miss any of our Pitt video content. youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the place to do it. All right, let's talk about these transfers. Of course, Pitt had 3 coming into the weekend. They had the kicker, James London from Murray State, was already committed. They had the offensive lineman from Charlotte, Kendall Stanley, was already committed. And then the wide receiver from Florida State, Deuce Spann, was committed. Who joined those guys? What 7 players? Let's just run through. We'll start with offense. Andy Jean, a wide receiver from Florida. He was in the 2023 recruiting class. He's from the state of Florida. He's actually from the Miami area. He was committed to Miami for a certain amount of time, flipped his commitment to Florida, ended up signing with the Gators. He was a 4-star prospect, a top 50 receiver in the 2023 recruiting class. Played about 5 games. Not about 5 games. He played 5 games over the last 2 years at Florida, caught 6 passes for 97 yards. He's 6'1", 184 pounds. There's not a lot to see out of his time at Florida, but you look back at, his high school film, you like his route running, his focus, his ability to track the ball. Feels a little bit like he could be the Konate Mumfield replacement or a potential replacement to step into that role. Or maybe if not the Mumfield role, a similar role somewhere in that top 6 of the depth chart. Good speed, good player. Obviously, highly touted prospect coming out of high school. And another receiver to add into this group that lost, Konate Mumfield to graduation, lost Dejon Reynolds to the transfer portal, Lamar Seymour, a young unproven player, but still a depth piece, left in the transfer portal as well. So they lost 3, brought in a bunch with the recruiting class, and then landed a couple transfers in Andy Jean and Deuce Spann, who we mentioned, Deuce Spann, the 6'4" receiver from Florida State. And then they brought in another offensive lineman, got another commitment from an offensive lineman this weekend. It's Keith Gouveia, is how I'm saying it. I looked at the pronunciation chart, pronunciation guide for Richmond football, because this guy played at Richmond. And a pronunciation guide breaks the name down into syllables spelled phonetically, right? And typically they'll put one of those syllables in all caps because that's where the emphasis is. But they didn't do that with Keith Gouveia. So it could be Keith Gouveia, Keith Gouveia, Keith Gouveia. But they don't have anything emphasized, so it's like Keith Gouveia. Gouveia. I'm not sure. Either way, offensive guard, played left guard at Richmond, started 24 games. I think over the course of his career, played in 32 total, started 24, gave up 8 sacks over the course of 33 games, allowed 33 pressures in 32 games, I should say. So about 1 pressure per game, 1 sack every 4 games. That's pretty good. He played left guard there. Pitt has an opening at left guard. Jason Collier's done. He's out of eligibility. Ryan Jacoby is done. He's out of eligibility. And so, they're going to have opportunities. There's openings along the offensive line. Keith G from Richmond and Kendall Stanley from Charlotte can fill some of those holes along the offensive line. Stanley at tackle and Keith G at guard. So filling in a few of those gaps. And then on the defensive side, Pitt got obviously the rest of the commitments they pulled in were all defensive guys. Blaine Spires, a defensive end from Utah State. He's actually out of Youngstown originally, went to Bowling Green for a couple years, then transferred to Utah State prior to the 2023 season. That year, playing at Utah State, he had 5 sacks and 8.5 tackles for loss. They had high expectations for Blaine Spires coming into this past season, which was supposed to be his final year of eligibility. He was going to be the man. He was going to be their top pass rusher. He was going to be the lead defensive end for Utah State. But he ended up getting hurt and thought it was just turf toe, something like that. He had an injury. He was suffered in June prior to this past season. They thought it was turf toe. Played through the first 4 games. Something happened. He ended up getting an MRI. Turned out he had a stress fracture in his foot that he was playing on through those first 4 games. Shut him down. He's able to take a medical red shirt and goes into the transfer portal. Comes to Pitt, likes what he sees, decides to go there. And look, we'll say this about Blaine Spires and the other defensive end they got. There's obviously a huge need at defensive end. With Nate Matlack graduating, Sincere Edwards going into the transfer portal, plus Chief Borders and David Ojebwe going into the transfer portal. It's 4 guys leaving the roster, even if all 4 didn't make a huge impact this year. Ojebwe barely played. Edwards and Borders were the numbers 3 and 4 defensive ends in the rotation. But Edwards, obviously, I think is a big loss, and we've talked about that quite a bit. He would have been a starter this year. We'll talk about that more when we talk about the fit for these guys. But Blaine Spires is a guy who ended up, between Bowling Green and Utah State, he had 84 pressures according to Pro Football Focus, and kind of a lighter guy. He's a bit of a smaller defensive end, 6'3", 230, somewhere around there. But that quicker guy to try and get around the edge. Joey Zielinski, however, is a defensive end from Eastern Michigan who committed to Pitt this weekend. He's a bigger guy. He's 6'4", 250 pounds. Started 20 games over the last 2 years. Had 67 tackles, 11.5 tackles for loss, and 3.5 sacks in those 2 seasons. He's a bigger defensive end, but they do like to play different types of guys out there, some different body types. His 6'4", 250 is bigger than what they've had in the past few years. I think we've seen them tend towards some smaller DNs. Zielinski's a bigger guy and, could potentially figure in. Again, there's a huge opportunity at defensive end. You have one returning starter in Jimmy Scott, and that's almost it, really, for the guys who have played. You don't have much in the way of returning experience at defensive end. So bringing in Blaine Spires and Joey Zielinski, who played a lot of games over their careers. If nothing else, you're bringing in veterans and guys with experience who can step into not only the starting role opposite Jimmy Scott, but also fill in some of the depth in the rotation role. Because, obviously, like any 4-3 team and most teams, like Pitt likes to rotate defensive line and defensive ends and get guys out there. Then the defensive backs. Pitt got 3 commitments from defensive backs this weekend. Rashawn Murray is a cornerback at Cal, PA. He's actually a local guy. He played in the City League. And then he went to he was committed to Akron at one point. That didn't work out, so he went to Cal, PA, or whatever they're calling it, Penn West, California. Although I think the football team is still California University of Pennsylvania. Had a big year this year. 4 interceptions this past season for Cal. Cal actually went 10-3, got to the quarterfinals of the national quarterfinals. And Murray was named a Division II second team All-American. Good size, good speed. I think he's a good player, and he can fit into the depth at corner. Losing Rylan Gandy and Tamarian Crumpley to the transfer portal, Pitt brings back Rashad Battle and Taman Lynham, but that's 2 guys. And 2 guys who played a lot last year, 2 out of the top 3 corners. But they need, even if those 2 start, they're going to want to rotate at least 3 guys at corner, if not 4. And Murray can be in that rotation along with some of the younger corners they've recruited over the last few years and developing and bringing up. And I think that's ultimately what they wanted to do. I think they wanted to be in a position where, you want to get a guy like Shadarian Harrison involved. You want to give him an opportunity and you want to bring him along. It's time for him to break out. He's been here for a couple of years. But you don't necessarily want to go into spring camp, at the very least, counting on a guy with minimal experience to be your number 3 corner. If he emerges as your 3rd best corner, your 2nd best corner, or whatever, that's great, but you didn't want to necessarily count on that. Well, now they don't have to count on that. The door can still be open for that to happen, but they don't have to rely on it when they brought in Rashawn Murray to fill in that depth at corner. And then they got, I'll tell you about this guy, Kavir Baines, and I didn't look up the pronunciation guide on him. I should have. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. He's a safety at UC Davis. Interesting guy. Played a lot. Started 10 games in 2022 and 23. But then this past year, he started all 14 games. He had 83 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 3 interceptions. Was all conference in the Big Sky, all first team all conference. Over the course of his 3 years from 2022 to 2024, he signed in the class of 2020, but the 3 years where he played a lot, 22, 23, 24, he had 154 tackles, 14 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions, 21 pass breakups. Looks like a field safety. And so I think the key for Pitt with safety this offseason, and particularly in the transfer portal, is they had, they felt good about bringing back Javon McIntyre, felt good about bringing back Cruz Brookins, felt good about Jesse Anderson being ready to step in, but wanted at least one more veteran to fill out that rotation of 4 guys. I think they like Alan Bryant, too, who you might have forgotten about. He redshirted as a true freshman this past year. I think they feel good about him as well. But I think they wanted another veteran because even though they like Bryant a lot, they like Jesse Anderson a lot, Bryant didn't play. And Anderson played a minimal amount of time, not a lot. Brookins played a good amount. I think he played in every game. He was in the Delta defensive sub package, played some in the base defense, but I think they wanted another veteran to sort of fill in there behind McIntyre and Brookins. And that's what Baines looks like. Even though he was playing at UC Davis, it seems like he would be a good fit. The other guy who, I think could be a safety, but might have a little bit more versatility is Jaden Bonsu. Again, another name I probably should have looked up. Bonsu. Either way, he's a safety at Ohio State. He was a safety at Ohio State, a 4-star recruit in the class of 2023, the number 6 prospect in the state of New Jersey, a top 25 safety in that class. Went to Ohio State, which tells you something about at least how he was viewed as a recruit coming out. But he didn't play in the last 2 seasons. He went there in 2023, redshirted in 23, didn't play for Ohio State this year, went into the transfer portal because he wanted an opportunity to play. What's interesting about Bonsu is he's listed on Ohio State's website at 6'2", 207. That's pretty big for a safety. We know Pitt likes bigger safeties. They like to have that boundary safety, be a bigger guy like a Donovan McMillan type of player. But I think Bonsu could play there, but I think the possibility is also, there's also a possibility he could move up and play as an outside linebacker, as a star linebacker. I think they need a little bit of depth there after losing Jordan Bass to the transfer portal. They could use another star linebacker or somebody, who could project there. And I think Bonsu could play at either one of those spots. I think he's big, but he's got the speed that he could probably play safety. But he could be maybe even more dynamite as an outside linebacker. And so there's a lot of potential there and versatility of where he could fit in. And so you kind of, I don't want to say you plug 2 holes with it. I think Baines from UC Davis plugs the hole of needing an experience or wanting an experienced safety to fill out the rotation. Bonsu doesn't have that experience. He's got 2 years in a college football program and one of the best programs in the country at Ohio State. So he's got that. He knows sort of what it takes to work, what level, how hard you need to work at this level to succeed, although he hasn't really seen it on the field. But he's got that versatility where he could play safety or fill the need for depth at outside linebacker, which I think everybody, rightfully feels great about Pitt's starting linebackers. I mean, Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis probably flanking Braylon Lovelace. That's a hell of a trio to start with. But you do need some depth behind them. Jeremiah Marcelin looks promising as the backup middle linebacker, but you do need some guys on the outside. I think Bonsu is going to be one of those guys. I mean, I think he'll be, potentially could be that backup star linebacker. And the backup, it's a backup, but it's still going to play. It's still somebody who's going to rotate in, get a lot of time on the field, and be involved in a defense that is aggressive and uses that position to be pretty aggressive and attacking. So seems like a good fit there. So that's the 10. The 7 they landed over the weekend, plus the 3 they already had, James London, Kendall Stanley, and Deuce Spann. What have they added? How have they done so far? And then just in the next couple minutes, we'll take a deeper look at this going forward. I mean, they filled 2 of the needs at offensive line in terms of getting a tackle and a guard. I think those were the baseline needs. And I think we could probably do a whole episode just on what they needed on the offensive line, what they got, and whether they should try and get more. But the baseline needs were getting a couple guys to come in and fill in the starting lineup, a tackle and a guard. And I think they got that. I think Stanley and Keith G should be able to step in and fill those 2 starting spots. You know what I mean? If at the very minimum you're filling 2 starting jobs, right tackle and left guard, then you probably got the guys who could do it. And those were the position they played. Kendall Stanley played right tackle at Charlotte. Keith G played left guard at Richmond. So I mean, it should be a natural fit for those guys to step in. Now, if they're ready to, how they'll do at this level, I mean, that's anyone's guess, and we'll find out soon enough. I still think they could have used some more guys to fill out the depth and fill out the rotation and even compete for starting jobs, particularly at offensive tackle. So that, if they just end up with these 2 guys, they'll have met, I think, the bare minimum. But they probably need more. They probably need more defensive ends too, which I think is going to be a tough sell because they've already brought in 2 in Blaine Spires and Joey Zielinski. But unless you're going to count on young players, unproven guys, and that seems like what they're going to have to do, they really could have used another standout defensive end. And maybe, I think Jaden Moore from Oregon, I think, was in over the weekend. So that possibility could exist there, that they might be able to grab him, but it's it feels like the bare minimum. But this would have been the bare minimum before Sincere Edwards went into the transfer portal. And I'm sort of the mind that once Edwards went into the transfer portal, then that bar for what counts as the bare minimum increased. It went up. And I'm not sure they really got what they needed there. And we'll see how Spires and Zielinski do. I don't know what to expect out of them. You know, I mean, there's some evidence of production. They've been playing at a lower level, but that doesn't mean they can't succeed here. I'm just not sure. We'll see. I think the defensive backs, I think they got some really nice fits with Rashawn Murray and Kavir Baines at corner and safety respectively. And then Bonsu, like I said, is a really interesting, versatile guy who can either play boundary safety or star linebacker. And so I think you really covered a lot there and really took care of some needs. I think you covered what you needed basically in the back seven with those three guys committing. The two receivers, I like the fits there. I think Deuce Spann brings size, and he's got pretty good speed. There's not a lot of times you see 6'4" receivers returning kickoffs 99 yards for a touchdown. And that's what he did, I think, in 2023 it was. And so, I like that addition. I think if you're going to take a chance on a guy who doesn't have a lot of production, you take a chance on a guy with the kind of physical tools that he has. And then Andy Jean, I think looks like a promising young receiver. He had a lot of talent coming out of high school. He was a good player. Just needs to do it in college and show it in college. And that's remains to be seen. And then James London, the kicker from Murray State, big leg guy, is 14 of 19 on field goals this year, but his misses, he had a miss from 61, a miss from 57, I think it was, and he made 6 kicks of 50 yards or more. So pretty solid stuff, pretty quality kicking there, and he'll step in for Ben Sauls, and I think cover that. So, addressed a lot of needs. Did they get all the needs taken care of here this weekend? Not necessarily, but I think they addressed a lot of needs. They filled a lot of holes. They plugged a lot of holes, and I think they'll I think it was pretty solid. I think they improved the overall depth, certainly on defense, and I think they got a couple starters at some spots where they would need some starters. But it's not over yet. We'll see what else Pitt's able to land. Obviously, it's going to need to happen somewhat soon. I think somebody told me that classes start on Wednesday. You get a little bit of a wiggle room. I think you get a little bit of a wiggle room beyond that to still bring guys in and get them into class, but not too much. So time's running a little bit short. Spring roster pretty close to being set. We'll see if they get anybody in the next 48 hours or so, or maybe a little bit beyond that if they're able to bring them in. But that's where it stands. Pretty solid haul. Like I say, I think answered a lot of questions. Maybe not all of them, but quite a few. So we'll see what else comes in. All right, tomorrow we're talking hoops, talking about Pitt Stanford, talking about Pitt Duke, talking about what we've seen out of these Panthers and what they could be tomorrow night if Damian Dunn returns. Certainly the return of Ishmael Leggett had a big impact on Saturday. We'll see what happens with when Pitt goes to Durham tomorrow. That's a big one. It's a big one. All right, stay safe in the snow unless the snow didn't come down, in which case enjoy your day as normal. Either way, have a great Monday. Thanks for watching the Morning Pit today. Make sure you like this video and subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. We will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.